recall that last time we talked about the cells, and the cells have three important parts: the plasma membrane, the nucleus, and the cytoplasm. We talked about the cytoplasm and transport mechanism that allow materials to come in and out of the cell. Now we are going to talk about the nucleus, the cytoplasm, and all the organelles that is within the cytoplasm. The nucleus is often in the center of the cell. It's being surrounded by a double membrane layers with pores, these pores here. This layer called the nuclear envelope. It's kind of like the nucleus has its own plasma membrane. The core of the nucleus is the nucleolus, and we have DNA inside of the nucleolus. If you remember, the DNA is very, very precious to us, and we want to protect it. If anything is wrong with the DNA, any damage, it can give the wrong instruction to make things in our body. For example, normally cells don't live forever. They have a lifetime, and eventually they will have to die. The DNA is the instruction to do everything in our body, including the instruction to kill off our cells. But if the DNA is damaged, and so happen to damage the part that has the instruction to kill the cell, that means our cells lost the instruction to be killed. That also means they will not die and continue to divide. This is pretty much what cancer is. Cancer cells are pretty much immortal cells. They don't die. They lost the signal to kill themselves. And so they keep dividing and form what we call a tumor. So you see the importance of keeping our DNA safe? That's why the DNA has to hide and protect and be protected deep inside of the nucleolus. When we need instruction to make something for our body, our cells would make a copy of that instruction instead of sending our DNA out of the nucleus. This process is what we called transcription. That copy of the DNA called RNA, it's a copy of the DNA transcribed, a transcription of the DNA. It's not the real DNA. And that RNA would then squeeze itself out of the nucleus via these nuclear pores here. When the RNA, which is a copy of a DNA, come out of the nucleus, it's going to look for these things called the ribosomes. Ribosomes are one of the organelles that read instruction from the RNA to make proteins. Proteins are kind of like the workers of the cell. Proteins are things that are actually doing the work inside of the cell. They do many things. For example, hemoglobin that found in your red blood cells that help your body transport oxygen around, that's a protein. We also have proteins that act as the cell police, proteins that help cells talk to each other. We also have channel proteins. Remember the channels that we talked about last time that help transport things across the plasma membrane? Yep, those are also proteins. Anyways, you can think of the ribosomes as factories and the proteins or workers of the cell. Some ribosomes are just floating around. like these ones here. They just float around the cells. Or around the cytoplasm. We call these free ribosomes because they are roaming around freely. They often make proteins for internal use. That means inside of the cell use. So only things that's inside of the cell. In comparison to other proteins or ribosomes, other ribosomes that attach to these organelles called the endoplasmic reticulum. These are called membranous ribosomes, or rough ribosomes, or membrane-bound ribosomes. There are several names. They're just not free ribosomes. These ribosomes, they make proteins to be sent out of the cell so that other cells can use the proteins that's made. I guess you can think of it as free ribosomes make homemade product, while membrane-bound ribosomes make imported product for other cells. The endoplasmic reticulum, or ER for short, is a series of flattened membranous tubes that is continuous with each other. There are two types of endoplasmic reticulum, or ER. There's rough ER and smooth ER. Rough ER has ribosomes attached to it that give it a rough appearance, like these ones right here. These rough ER has proteins attached to them, or sorry, not proteins, ribosomes attached to them. And earlier we say that ribosomes make proteins, right? These membranous ribosomes, which are the ones attached to the rough ER here, they make proteins. And then the rough ER would take in those proteins to modify and make sure that they are functional before sending them off. I guess you can think of the rough ER as the quality control guys. The other ER is the smooth ER, which is that one right there. It's smooth because it doesn't have any ribosome attached to it. The main function of the smooth ER is to process and make lipids, something like phospholipids that work as the phospholipids bilayer part of the plasma membrane that we talked about previously. It also plays a role in drugs detoxification. You often find cells of alcoholic and drug users to have more smooth ER because those cells, since they have to take care of those drugs, right? So they need more of the smooth ER to get rid of or to detoxify those drugs that was consumed. So last time we talked about the ribosomes that make the proteins, and then the rough ER quality check it. Now, those proteins gotta be sent somewhere, right? How does the cell know where to send those proteins? Where to send those workers? Well, you have these things called the Golgi apparatus. These Golgi apparatus sort and put an address on these proteins. They act like little post office. If the proteins are good to go, everything is good, then the Golgi would put them in a vesicle and put an address on them and spit them out of the cell via exocytosis. With this address label on the vesicle, the protein would have a destination, and it's either go to, maybe your heart tissues or brain tissues or whatever tissue that is. It knows where to go. But if the proteins are bad, then the Golgi apparatus would put a tag on those proteins so that those proteins can go to the lysosomes, which are trash bags. The lysosomes have digestive enzymes that can break down a lot of things, from bad proteins to bacteria, viruses, toxins, a lot. Funny enough, it can even digest the whole cell. We call these autolysis. Auto means self and lysis means breaking things down. Autolysis means the cell is breaking down itself. In other words, killing itself. So these lysosomes would spit out digestive enzymes and eventually kill the whole cell. As you can see, phagocytosis happens as the cell is eating a bacteria. Right? So there was a bacteria outside, and then phagocytosis just consume that bacteria. Then the bacteria gets delivered to the lysosome. In this case, these here are the lysosome, and mix with the digestive enzyme, and the bacteria ultimately get destroyed. So I guess you can think of lysosomes. It's always going to equal to trash bag, where you want to destroy all of the bad stuff. Another organelle inside of the cell is the peroxisomes. These are our cell's main detoxifier. We have the smooth ER that can detoxify some drugs, but not as strong as the peroxisomes. These peroxisomes neutralize any dangerous things like free radicals, poison, alcohol. They're going to destroy them all. Specifically, by neutralizing them, turning all of those toxins into water for your cells. Here is another popular organelle, the mitochondria. Their job is to make ATP, which are energy for our body to use. You can run around, you can pick up a pen, you can do everything in your life is because you have ATP, or energy. And the mitochondria generate energy by glucose, which is sugars from the food that you eat. It converts glucose to ATP, or energy, via this process called cellular respiration, which you should have learned in more general biology. Cytoskeleton is pretty much a network of rods that run through the cytosol. You can think of them as highway of materials to be transported from place to place within the cell. Or another way of think of cytoskeleton is pretty much their bones, ligaments, and muscles that help the cell or help stabilize the cell shape and help things move around within the cell. You see these little stringy thing that you see there, these are cytoskeletons. You can also see these green strings. Those are cytoskeletons. Just think about, what happened if your body lose your bones and muscles. You don't exactly have your shape anymore, right? You would just be a glob of thing. Same thing with the cells. If they lose their cytoskeleton, the cells would have abnormal shape, and they would not be able to hold up their normal shape and do their normal things. Besides contributing to the cell's shape, cytoskeletons can act as little railroads for these things called transport proteins to carry vesicles around. So as you can see here, that whole thing is a microtubule, which is one of the cytoskeleton. And this guy right here, that is a transport protein. And what he's carrying is a vesicle. Inside of that could be proteins. And he's just basically carrying these to the next destination. You can also see another vesicle hanging around. And look, there's another guy carrying that vesicle.